I'd like to start just by welcoming Paul War MP, who's a member of the Culture, Media and Sports Committee, who's taking part in this evidence session as a guest. Now, this is the second session in the committee's inquiry into social media, misinformation and harmful algorithms. We've previously heard from those impacted by the spread of misinformation, particularly over the summer. We are now hearing from the platform companies. Meta, X and TikTok will join us in the afternoon. But this morning we are really pleased to give a warm welcome to Amanda Story, who is the Managing Director, Trust and Safety for Google EMEA. On behalf of the committee, I do want to thank you again for joining us. Google is one of the largest and most important companies in this space. Some may say the most important company in this space. And the committee felt it was very important to hear from you because there is a huge level of public interest in this question of the spread of misinformation. Indeed, I have been surprised by the level of public interest in my constituency and across the country and in Parliament. And I suppose that brings me to my first question to you. So, Ms. Story or Amanda?
Either is fine. Thank you.
I've got Amanda. My first question to you. Do you agree that tech companies have a responsibility to be transparent and accountable before Parliament?
Well, thank you for having me here today to speak to the committee. The issues that you're looking at are core to what my team does every day, keeping people safe online, looking at AI responsibility, and making sure we're compliant with regulations like the OSA. As you said, billions of people put their trust in Google every day and search for information on our platforms. And we see it as our responsibility to make sure that the information that they find is relevant, high quality, authoritative information, and that we're not unintentionally providing misleading, hateful or harmful information to them. We also see it as our responsibility to make sure we provide context on that information. So things like about this result or about this image provide people with information so they can understand the quality and the provenance of the information they're consuming across our platforms. And importantly, we're not a social network, so we're optimizing for quality and not for engagement. We can potentially talk today a little bit about how some of those obligations and processes are evolving in a world of generative AI. But maybe just to speak briefly about the Online Safety Act, which I know you're also focused on. So we support the goals of that. We think that online safety is absolutely critical and something we've invested heavily in over the years. We think the Online Safety Act can raise the bar across the industry in a really important way. And it is one of the most complex and comprehensive pieces of safety regulation that my team has seen anywhere in the world. So we're working hard to implement the requirements. We're compliant in some areas, we have enhancements to make in others, and we're collaborating very closely with Ofcom to do that. Very happy to talk more about that today.
Well, thank you very much, Amanda. And you have touched on a number of points which I know committee members are really interested in and we'll be coming to. But I do just want to press you on the question regarding whether big tech companies have a responsibility to be transparent and accountable before Parliament. My constituents want to know whether a company like Google feels a responsibility to be accountable before their representatives in Parliament.
Yeah, so we absolutely believe in transparency and accountability in this space. And to give you a couple of examples of how we think about transparency, you can think about content safety operations as like a funnel. You've got bad activity, bad actors trying to get in at the top of that funnel, and then you have multiple lines of defense that you put in place to protect users and protect the quality of the information we're serving. And transparency at each of those levels is really important. So at the very top level, you can think about the safety by design of our products themselves. Things like safe search, which we turn on for children to blur potentially bad content or pornographic content. Also making sure that we verify actors who are trying to serve content across our platforms. So that prevention layer, including our policy set, is really, really important, and we're completely transparent about that policy set. We have help centres that explain those policies and explain how to adhere to those policies, as well as our ranking approach, which is part of safety by design, which again, we're completely transparent about. We have a 170-page search quality rater manual that you can find online and take a look through. So that's a sort of prevention layer, and there's some elements of transparency within there. You've then got the detection layer. So that's how you actually detect content that violates the policies I just mentioned. And that is a combination of what we call classifiers, so pieces of machine learning that run across our systems and detect content that violates those policies. And then flaggers, so we have users flag things to us. That's part of our accountability. And we provide transparency about takedowns that we do on the basis of those classifiers and on the basis of flags that we receive. And then finally, the sort of response layer at the bottom of the funnel, if you haven't managed to prevent the bad content, you haven't necessarily detected the bad content, you can then have people reporting that content to you, trusted flaggers, for example, governments, for example, and we have channels to provide to trusted authorities around the world to flag things to us. So we have transparency and accountability at all layers of that funnel, and absolutely believe that that's a really important part of doing this work well.
Thank you again for that answer, which I think touches on many points. I'm just trying again to just the relationship that you see towards governments and the representatives of the public. I think you talked about trusted channels for governments to identify issues, etc. But do you see that you have a level of accountability towards, actually not government, but towards Parliament, towards the representatives of the people?
Yeah, so I think that...
That's okay. It's a yes. That's right.
Yeah, it's a yes. It's a yes.
Great. That's fantastic. That's great. And I'll move on because we have a lot of interest in this, and I'm going to ask. These are all MPs, and I'm going to ask Adam to take us forward.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, Amanda. Thank you for joining us. One of the reasons that we felt it was so important to bring Google in on this conversation today is because of your leadership in search and AI, and the increasing use of AI in disseminating information via search and other means, but also, we must be honest, sometimes misinformation. How effective are Google's measures in preventing the dissemination of misleading and harmful content from appearing in search, and how do you evaluate the success of those tools?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my team focuses on this every day. And when you look at search, there are kind of three levels here. There's the actual ranking itself, which obviously we've refined over 25 years to make sure that we're elevating high quality content, then we're not unintentionally elevating potentially misleading content. Direct navigational queries are obviously challenging. We are organising the world's information, making it universally accessible and useful, but it is the internet, and there's a lot of content out there. We then have safety interventions that we put in place. So on search, there are certain queries that we see that are particularly sensitive user journeys, where someone is obviously in crisis, and we want to make sure we're providing high quality information and giving them a sort of recovery journey. So those safety interventions in search are really critical. We have what we call one boxes that appear at the top of the search results for particularly sensitive queries, and make sure that we're directing people to the highest quality information, often in partnership with local entities. And then the sort of final piece of it is the user context that I mentioned earlier. So making sure that we're providing clear information to users about the content they're consuming. Where has that image come from? How old is that result or site that they're seeing? And that's a really important part of users being able to assess the quality of the information they're consuming, as well as all the media literacy investments we do. Think about the Internet Legends for Children, which is trying to teach children about information quality that they might be consuming online.
Thanks. And I mean, on that latter point, how do you evaluate the success of that process?
Yes, sorry. Great question. So we have our 16,000 search quality raters who are around the world, and they are every day looking at the quality of the search results and giving us feedback on those. They're working against the 170-page manual that I mentioned, but that set of constant evaluations is absolutely critical to us to look at how well we're doing against our own policies and against our own standards of high-quality information. So that evaluation is critical. It's also really important to respond when we see that we've got something wrong. So we have our strategic command team that is dealing with escalations and incidents in the real world, and we're constantly learning from that and feeding that back into the way we do ranking, the way we run those evaluations, experiments that we run to improve search, as well as to the sort of safety interventions and user context tools that I mentioned.
Thanks, Amanda. And that leads on well to my next question, actually. So talking about these safety interventions and this kind of constant learning process that you're going through, how does Google determine which of the measures that you're taking are done automatically versus which ones are done manually?
Ooh, so we are dealing with enormous scale across our platforms. If you look at the number of ads that we took down in the most recent report, it's 5.5 billion in 2023. The number of publisher pages we demonetized was 2.1 billion. You can't do that all with humans. You have to do it with a blend of what we call classifiers, these pieces of machine learning, and humans. And the way that works is the classifiers run across all of our products and assess whether anything is violating our policies. Where they can make a decision, they do. And across some of our products, you see sort of 95% of the takedowns that we make first detected by a classifier. Where the classifier can't make the decision, it passes the content to our human review queues. And they then assess those pieces of content against our policies and make a decision. Those decisions feed back into improving the classifier. So you have that constant feedback loop that's really important. I mentioned 95% first found by a classifier. What about the other 5? So that's really the user flags that we get. It's quite a noisy signal. Sometimes users will flag things they don't like rather than things that actually violate policies. But that's complemented by trusted flaggers, so academic and civil society experts, as well as government flags from around the world. So that blend of humans and machines to do this work at the scale that we operate is absolutely critical.
Can I just ask a point of clarification there?
Sure.
Because it's very helpful understanding how the process works. The speed of the process is also very important because misinformation and virality of misinformation is driven by the speed. Do you measure the speed of the process, and how do you feel that is successful in terms of reducing the speed of the spread of misinformation?
Yeah, so the classifiers are a really key part of being quick. They can run across our products much faster than humans can, and so that's part of how we deal with the speed. I think the virality you're mentioning is more pertinent to social media companies than it is to the sort of libraries of content or the access to the internet that most of our products provide. But we do, in a crisis situation, if there's a real-world incident, have crisis protocols. We have teams that are dedicated.
So my understanding is Google's shareholding of search is about 90% of global search. Something like 94% of adults are using Google search regularly. This arguably gives Google a near monopoly of search on the internet. Given the sort of need to democratize information and make all information freely available, how can we ensure that, given that one company is broadly in control, how can we ensure that that information remains democratized? And then do you think that we require legislation to ensure that's the case?
So the way search works is pretty transparent. The search rater guidelines are out there. They can be looked at. We're running hundreds of experiments all the time to continue to improve search. And giving people a high-quality experience when they come to search is a business imperative for us. That's what users expect of us, and that's what we'll continue to invest in. Making sure that the ecosystem that people arrive in is safe is also critical to our business. So our publishers expect that high-quality ads will serve on their sites. Advertisers expect that their ads will show up in a brand-safe environment. And so creating that safe, that high-quality ecosystem is something that is absolutely critical, and we will continue to invest in.
I think that's very reasonable, but as we've seen with another platform over the last year or so, you can get new leadership in these companies and that can drastically alter the direction of the company. I'm not saying this is going to happen to Google, certainly not, but were something like that to happen to a company like Google in the future, how can we defend against that?
So I think a lot of this goes back to holding companies accountable on the mission they've set out. So ours is around authoritative information, and we will continue to optimize for that. I think you were also kind of asking about whether we're going to end up, or any company might end up being sort of biased towards one person's point of view or one country's point of view. And I think what's really important in this space is we're building for the world. We're taking into account perspectives around the world of users, of experts. My team consults with civil society and academia on a regular basis through our Google Safety Engineering Centers. And we last year consulted with over 8,000 people in 150 events. All of that global feedback is part of what ensures we're creating an experience that is appropriate for all, not biased to one person's point of view or one country's point of view.
Thanks, Amanda. And then just finally from me, just to push on that last point, do you think we need legislation to ensure that that information remains available to everybody?
I don't think it's my position to advise on that, but I think that the business imperative for us is the piece that keeps us optimizing for high quality information and building services that are useful to the world.
Amanda.
I think, just before I pass on to Emily, I think there's a very important point that Adam's been making there. And I suppose, you know, the theory would say that competition would help keep a company honest or unique, or keep a, you know, give consumers choice. And where there is a lack of competition, then it is up to Google's internal processes, etc. I think is what you're saying in your overall mission, given the lack of competition in that space.
So I'm not a competition expert at all, so I don't want to comment unduly. I'm sure the team would be happy to follow up in writing, but when you look at the online ecosystem, there are a range of different services where you can find information. It's not just search. There are dedicated vertical search environments if you think about travel or shopping. So very happy to follow up and offer more.
Okay, I'm ready to do that. Okay, Emily, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Amanda. I wanted to go into the AI overview, new function of Google, which it sees Google moving from a search engine to actually generating actual content using AI. I think you've described yourselves as an AI-first company. I wanted to understand how you ensure the accuracy, and ensuring that it meets your own content standards, but it also meets local laws around harmful information and incitement to violence.
Yeah, thank you for raising the point about local laws, because I've talked a bit less about that so far, but it's worth just taking a moment on that point, and then can absolutely speak to AI overviews. So we have teams of lawyers who make sure that we're adhering to the local laws in the countries in which we operate and taking down illegal content quickly that we've detected or that's been flagged to us. That is complemented by the policy set that I talked about before, that is ensuring that we're going further than local laws and taking down things that could be potentially misleading, hateful or harmful to create that safe ecosystem that I talked about. AI overviews is a really interesting new feature within search. It's like past features that we've launched, so image search, for example. And the reason it's particularly interesting is that we think it's going to be very helpful to users to, instead of getting 10 blue links, get something that actually condenses information from across potentially multiple sites, multiple modalities, so text, image, video, and potentially multiple languages, and condenses that into an answer to their question with citations, so they can go dive in and explore further. So we think it's very helpful as an evolution for users. Those citations are really important to make sure people are able to jump in and dig into the content even further. And we have, as we do across all of our products, safety interventions to make sure the AI overview results that we're creating are meeting the safety standards that we set. So that's informed by 25 years of ranking experience in search, 20 odd years of trust and safety experience of trying to make sure that all of the content that we have on our platforms is safe.
I don't think it quite answers the question I was asking. So how within the AI overview are you ensuring that the information is not harmful, not hateful, not inciting violence, and not promoting harm?
Yeah, so just like our policies elsewhere across our platforms, we have policies for AI overviews. So we do rigorous testing of all of those features before they roll out. Think about sort of adversarial red teaming, performance testing, where we set benchmarks, and we're testing in all sorts of languages. We're testing all sorts of sensitive queries that someone might put in to make sure that the AI overview that is returned meets those quality standards. So that's the sort of pre-launch part of it. There's then the post-launch responsive approach that we take. So if we do see someone flagging an AI overview as being harmful or inappropriate, we will absolutely dig into that feedback and look at what went wrong, why did it violate our policies, why did that AI overview trigger on an area that potentially there wasn't high quality information to be surfacing. And that feedback loop is really important for us to continue to refine those evals and get safety right.
And is misinformation one of those things that you evaluated against? So, for example, in the news, we saw that the AI overview asserted that the average IQ in Pakistan was 80, Kenya was 75.2, and Sierra Leone was 45.07. Now, quite clearly, this is just racism and has absolutely been debunked by scientific research. That's clear misinformation. How do you ensure that clear misinformation is absolutely stripped from your AI overview, or is misinformation considered less important than something that's potentially illegal?
So absolutely not. We're very concerned about harm, real world harm, and information quality. The example that you're giving is from a Wired article that people may have seen. It was absolutely not the sort of answer that we would have wanted to give, absolutely violated our policies, and we have taken action on that particular space.
Can I just say that, because I followed that, and the action was not within hours, it was not even within days. It took some time for that to come down.
Yeah, that's totally fair. This was the very early stages of AI overviews, and this is a new feature. It's something that we labelled as experimental and that we absolutely are continuing to refine over time. So you're right. It was not as quick a reaction as we would have expected. But we have taken action. It did violate our policies. And what we learned from that experience is that there are certain areas where if a user puts in a query, there just isn't enough high quality content on the internet to create an AI overview. So we have AI overviews triggering on certain queries and not triggering on others. And if we see there's what we call a data void, which is not enough high quality information, then we won't trigger an AI overview. So we have implemented a more systemic fix to exactly that problem space.
So obviously this committee is very interested in both the spread of misinformation and the spread of incitement to violence and hatred in the context of what we've seen rise in the UK, particularly during the summer. What changes have you actually done as a result of these examples to actually make sure it doesn't happen again? That's what I'm not clear about. I get you took action on this one, but what is going to stop it from happening in the future? Yeah. And what gives then rise confidence to the public looking at these AI overviews or allowing their children to use them to write a paper for school?
Yeah, so it's critical for us to be raising authoritative information, not serving information to people that is misleading or harmful. So we have strict policies to make sure that we're meeting that benchmark. We're constantly learning and taking feedback from users, from other authorities, and making sure that we are responsive and learning from incidents like this. So that constant learning process and judging us on the outcomes that you see on our products, I think is critical here. Again, I would go back to we're not social media, and some of the problems you're articulating of viral spread of misinformation, for example, is something that is more pertinent in those contexts.
I get what you're saying, this last question, but and I get you trying to make that distinction between a search company and social media, but the reality is your AI scraping to create your AI overview is scraping social media. So you can't really disaggregate that world anymore. It's not, you don't live in two different spaces.
It's a really fair question. So again, I would go back to 25 years of search ranking has taught us a lot about how you distinguish high quality information from lower quality information, and the way of assessing relevance, quality is really nuanced based on all of those search experiments we've done and all of that years of experience in search ranking. So we're very much using that to make sure that the sources that we use to create an AI overview are high quality sources. And in some cases where something is a really fast moving event, there's a lot of discussion on social media. We also have treatments like breaking news to make sure that we're putting high quality news information at the top of the search results, not necessarily triggering an AI overview, and using authoritative sources in any AI overview that is being created.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And I know that we're going to move on to a very relevant question area from Alison, but can I just suggest, Amanda, perhaps could you write to us and give us an idea of how quickly, I mean, I take the point about virality and social media, but how quickly you would now expect to take down something like racist IQ results, or how quickly you talked about us holding to account according to your mission and your processes, how quickly you would expect to be able to take things down like that. Okay. Now, Alison, I know you have something very relevant.
It is very relevant, we've been talking a lot about assessing output and moderating that. And Emily quite rightly commented on the data that you scrape to help train your AI tools. So I'm quite interested in how you maybe prevent that output from happening in the first place by assessing your input data. So, so what do you do to assess the credibility of the sources you use to train your AI tools, and how much human oversight is there in evaluating that process?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and I will admit I'm not an expert in training of models, but I'll tell you how we think about training of models as related to application safety and ultimately content safety. So you have to look at it in those three layers: the model itself, the foundational model itself, and we have things like our frontier safety framework and research papers like responsible capability scaling that talk about how you actually assess a frontier model and make sure you're staying ahead of capabilities that might be emerging from that model. And a lot of that also is, as you say, about the data that we use to train those models and ensuring that is filtered and safe and authoritative information. Again, the ranking experience we have is really, really important there. But it's not just the foundational models. You have to think about the application layer and the content layer as well. So the application layer, once you have the frontier model, you then tune it and train it for a particular use case, a particular product application. And it's really important at that stage to run evaluations, adversarial red teaming, to set benchmarks, and to understand the performance of that model for its particular application in different languages, in different cultural contexts around the world. And that's something that the trust and safety team is responsible for doing. And then obviously the content that the model actually creates is critical here. So once the model is out there and being used, how do you make sure people understand that content was created by an AI? And we've invested a lot in our content provenance standard and tools, so things like SynthID and the C2PA provenance standard, which is a coalition approach, to make sure people can understand if the content they're seeing is AI generated. So those three layers are quite helpful. I take the point that the authoritativeness, the quality of the training data is really key here. I'm sure the team would be happy to follow up and share more. Again, I'm not an expert on that particular piece of it.
Yeah, because Google developed, when the AI ethics team that you had with Joy Bull and Winnie Meredith Whittaker, and you had the AI audit tool. I mean, is that something that is used?
I'm afraid I don't know the details of that specific one, but
it's
happy to follow up.
Okay, thank you for that. You've touched on something again, which I might come back to, about what users can use, information they get to assess validity of the output. So I'm going to go back a little bit to the search tools. You've optimized, it was only in October 2024, optimizing your search for images and links. And images and videos are quite difficult to assess by automated tools to make sure that they are safe and harm-free. So my question is related to, I've sort of answered my own question really, but what challenges do images and videos pose to AI moderation and compared to text, and what changes have you made to account for this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you're right that classifiers tend to be tuned for a text environment, audio, image, or video environment. And so we use a blend of classifiers to deal with any potential real-world harm issue or policy area. Those classifiers for image are really tuned based on things like Google image search that we've had for many, many years. And our video classifiers are tuned on things like YouTube videos, which again, we've been running for many years. So we do actually have very good classifiers in those spaces. And I think that you see that in terms of the quality of the outputs, that those are as good as the classifiers running on text or audio.
Okay. I was wondering if you were going to mention your AI generated, using your AI tools to generate images and videos. Yeah. And so you've been talking about you having these embedded watermarks and the metadata so that your classifiers can assess these. I have quite an interesting question about that might help with the speed, which you've been referring to in crisis situations. I think you're probably not there. But I wonder whether you thought about extending that labelling, that watermark labelling, so that users can assess what they are seeing is AI generated, a sort of antitrust mark, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have what's called SynthID, which is exactly that. It's a watermark that a user can see to assess that something is AI generated. And then C2PA is an industry coalition that is trying to come up with a provenance standard so that it is applied consistently across the web and people can consume that information. You know, I hope that we get to a place where those provenance standards are really widely adopted, whether it's our own or the C2PA one.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. Paul, yes.
Hi, Amanda. The government, through DCIT, has its own National Security Online Information Team. It's been rebranded, but it's attempting to counter misinformation online. Can you tell us how Google engages with that team? Are you proactive? Are you reactive? And how frequently are you in contact with them?
Yeah, so we do engage with that team more on some products than others, but we're not dependent on that team. So we have our own policies, we have our own technical teams who look for signals of state-backed activity. So our threat analysis group is tracking 270 state actors across 50 countries on a real-time basis, and that then feeds signals to all of our products to take action against coordinated influence operations that are state-backed. When we do find examples of that, we're transparent about that, and in crisis situations, we absolutely share information directly with the unit that you're describing.
Okay, can I move on to digital advertising? Obviously, Google is a major player in advertising space online. Adalytics, an American firm, only this month, published research showing that Google's ad networks had placed adverts on a sickening child abuse image website called IBB. You will be aware of this. The companies whose adverts appeared alongside there were obviously appalled. They said they had no idea sometimes where their products and brands were being advertised when they sent it to Google. Do you have any real answers in terms of how you can cope with that as a phenomenon? The worry is that this isn't just a one-off, that then you reacted quickly and you countered it, but there's something systemic about the lack of clarity and transparency in the way your digital networks work.
Yeah, so I am familiar with this case, and obviously it's abhorrent to see any child sexual abuse material online, and certainly not acceptable to see that content monetizing in any way. It is a challenge with user-generated content sites that you have to constantly assess the content that is being generated on those sites. In that particular case, we had already taken action against some of the sites that were identified, and the monetization was in the order of sort of $2 to $3. So not acceptable, but very, very tiny amounts. In terms of child sexual abuse imagery and material generally, we have a really strong record in this space. So we've invested heavily to make sure that we are able to identify this content really accurately, really quickly, and take action. We have what's called our Child Safety API that we actually offer to the industry and is used by many, many players, large and small, to detect CSAM and then prioritize it for review and action. And we provide all of those signals to NCMEC, the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children. Our tip reports to them are known as being some of the highest quality in the industry. We provided 3 million of those tip reports in the first half of last year. So our record on CSAM is excellent. This was one case where we got it wrong, and we've taken action on that. And then to your broader question about trust and transparency in the online ads ecosystem, I talked earlier about this triumvirate of users, publishers, and advertisers who we're optimizing for. And it's obviously critical that we get that right. That's a business imperative for us. Publishers have to be able to trust that the ads that are serving on their sites are high-quality ads that operate within our policies. Advertisers have to be able to trust that their ads are not going to show up next to this kind of content. And we give them controls to make sure they can tailor by category or even by URL if they want to really restrict where their ads are showing up. And that's all part of our transparency and accountability to the advertising ecosystem to make sure people can have confidence in the safety of that.
A lot of advertisers still think it's too opaque and that there's not enough transparency. Are you taking any fresh steps to reassure them?
Would be happy to share more details on recent changes that we've made. I think the key pieces for us are the controls for advertisers that I mentioned that give them that granular ability to sort of shift the dial on how the environments in which their ads are going to show up. And then the ad safety report that we publish every year, which talks about the actions that we've taken at the content layer and the actor layer. So, for example, in the last report that we put out, we'd taken action on 5.5 billion ads that violated our policies, 2.1 billion publisher pages that violated our policies. So we are very, very active in this space to ensure the ecosystem is safe and trustworthy.
Obviously, you mentioned that it's very damaging for the advertisers, but ultimately it's very damaging to Google, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because even if it is just $2 or $3 on a sickening child abuse website, that's appalling. And isn't it the case that Google, as it stands, cannot guarantee it doesn't profit from such websites, and it doesn't profit from information, and it doesn't profit from the hate speech? You simply can't say that, can you?
Well, we have really rigorous policies. We have really rigorous processes to detect this kind of content and take action, or detect bad actors and take action at the actor level. And we take it very seriously, doing that work well. That's what my team does every day. We are trying to stick to those policies at speed, at scale, at high quality. And we continuously learn from where we have made errors to make sure that system is improving.
But at the moment, you can't guarantee that Google doesn't profit from all that hate.
We have been audited by multiple third parties that have not found evidence of us significantly in this space. So we will continue to be transparent and to be open to those sorts of assessments. And ultimately it comes down to publishers, advertisers, users trusting us and using our services, and that's the real test for us.
Thanks, Paul. I think I appreciate that. I appreciate the answers that you're giving. I think this is a really in this complex area, but it is a really important area that I think we'll spend I have a couple of follow-up questions to the points Paul was making, and just in the context of Paul emphasised the role of Google in internet advertising, and Google's stock market capitalization is $2.2 trillion. Huge amount. Profits of 74 billion. 87% of your revenue is from advertising, and you have 40% of worldwide digital advertising, which is significant, clearly. But it's very important. You have 90%, as I understand it. 90% of the market share of the sell side of advertising, because you own key infrastructure such as Google Ad Manager, Google Ad Exchange, and Google AdSense. And given the absolute critical role of advertising in driving revenues for the platform companies, the infrastructure holders like yourself, but also, advertising as a driver of misinformation. I think that's something that the committee is particularly interested in. It is inevitable, in a way, is it not, that given your role in orchestrating and in owning critical parts of the advertising infrastructure, it's inevitable that you will be profiting. I'm not saying intentionally, but you'll be profiting from misinformation. Researchers at Stanford and Carnegie Mellon found that 75% of disinformation websites are monetized by advertising. You will inevitably have a significant share of that in some way. Is that not the case?
So I want to draw an important distinction between coordinated influence operations, disinformation, which is state-backed activity,
yes.
And then misinformation, information quality more generally. So on state-backed activity, I've talked a little bit about some of the technical teams that we have there to track that activity and take action. On the information quality side, it really does come back to our policies. We are trying to avoid anything that could create real-world harm, could be misleading, could be hateful. We are constantly evolving policies based on feedback from experts all around the world. And we are running our classifiers and our human review queues to make sure that we're adhering to those policies at high quality, consistently at speed. So we are doing everything we can to make sure we're creating a safe and trustworthy, high quality information ecosystem. And that's really critical to our business.
I appreciate that, and I think you've gone through a number of different ways in which Google does that, and you've set out different processes and checks that. I think what this committee is focused on misinformation, and it's important the distinction that you draw. But it does sound to me, well, in fact, it's not that it sounds to me. If you have 40% of global digital advertising, and if you agree, which the evidence shows that significant, some misinformation or the drive for misinformation is caused by advertising revenues. So the incentives for the communication of misinformation is advertising revenues. Then you must accept that Google plays a significant part in that.
So the numbers that you state are absolutely correct. I would go back to the processes that my team runs, the policies we set, the way we enforce is how we take our responsibility in this space to sort of manifest that we want to ensure a safe ecosystem.
Let's just before we move on, just on this particular example, we have an organisation. We've seen the committee has seen an unpublished report by a non-profit organisation called Check My Ads, which presents what they say is evidence that Google helped to monetize Channel 3 Now, which was a site that published misinformation about the Southport attacks, and particularly and specifically the wrong name of the attacker, which and the information that the attacker was a Muslim migrant was wrong, and they have they have evidence that the site claimed to be monetized by two major companies, Azuric and Google, at the time that it published that misinformation. Now, I don't know whether you've been contacted by them. Perhaps you can. But if that is the case, or if you accept that, on something of the balance of probabilities, there will be cases like that. Do you speak to your own responsibilities or your own processes to address that? But is that really good enough, given what we've seen and what we do not want to see again?
Yeah, so I would completely agree that monetizing any form of low quality information, particularly associated with an atrocious real world attack, is absolutely not acceptable. I haven't seen that report yet. I'm very happy to take a look at the report once it comes out and to respond in writing if that's helpful. But very much agree that would violate our policies. It's something that we would look into and understand what had gone wrong. These fast-moving real-world situations are very challenging. There is viral spread of information on social media, and we have to deal with the echo of that across sites that we operate with.
I appreciate that, and we will look forward to your response. I mean, just to clarify again, though, Channel 3 Now is not social media. It is a website, which was part of the drive of misinformation through social media. But it was a website which is apparently which was being monetized through advertising. Emily, did you want to come in on this?
Yes. Yeah. So I think it's quite interesting what you're saying, that there's a difference between the illegal content that my colleague Paul was raising in terms of and misinformation sites. Now, this is an interesting use of language, but clearly comes down to the quality of the systems within Google. Misinformation that leads to violence, which is exactly the case that you have raised. I still don't understand how you, through your ad processes, ensure that you are not monetizing and encouraging the creation of this material in order for the content creators to knowingly create material that is harmful misinformation, incites violence against others or themselves, your ad model seems to promote that kind of activity. And I'm trying to understand how you are disincentivizing the creation of that material and websites.
Yeah, so our publisher policies are the way we deal with this, and then the enforcement of those policies. So the policies prohibit content that is hateful, inciting to violence, exactly what you're describing. We can then take action at the content level, so at the page level, at the actor level, and we have strike systems that we employ. If a publisher repeatedly violates our policies, we can take action at the whole site level. And we do take those actions. So in our most recent report, we took down 2.1 billion publisher pages from being able to monetize, so cutting off their ability to make money from this sort of content that violates our policies. And 395,000 publishers were demonetized at the publisher level. So we're absolutely taking action there.
Could you give an example of where you've taken action against something that we would know about in the UK to demonetize a site? Could you give an example?
I could follow up with a specific example of a UK publisher. I don't have an example top of mind, but we're taking these actions at scale every single day all around the world.
I'd appreciate that follow-up because I'm failing to see the action that you're talking about. So Google controls between 40 and 80% of the market share of the buy side, right? And that's putting together Google ads and YouTube, which you own, and they're similar, and these work together, don't they? Are you aware of the recent report from the Centre for Counting Digital Hate looking at the monetization of anorexia and eating disorder material and then monetizing it and having advertisers like Ralph Lauren and L'Oreal on these sites that are clearly about self-harm to young people? How are you actually taking action to stop that?
So that space is one that absolutely is concerning, and my heart goes out to anyone who is experiencing that sort of situation. What we try to do is make sure that in those very sensitive user journeys where someone is looking for that kind of information, that we're elevating what's called one boxes. So those are a particular treatment within search where we're elevating information from, for example, the Samaritans or Shout Text, local UK-based entities that someone can reach out to get support and to help them towards a recovery journey. And obviously that's particularly critical in the sorts of areas that you're describing.
Right, but how much money has Google made off of these ads on eating disorder content that's being promoted? 1 in 4 of the material coming up and being suggested by YouTube breaches your own policies in terms of harmful eating content. And these adverts of quite high profile, big brand names, how much money do you reckon that you have made off of that?
I'm afraid I can't answer that question. I don't know, and I'm not a YouTube expert. We have a dedicated YouTube trust and safety team, so we'd have to follow up and provide some more information there. But I would go back to, in these instances of things like eating disorder journeys, we are really focused on making sure people have access to support, that they're getting high quality information, and a navigational query where someone's typing in the URL of the site they want to go to, but we can make sure those sites are adhering to our publisher policies, and we can make sure the search page is flooded with information to help people to recover.
So just to come back on that, because it comes back to your point, Chi, how fast is fast, right? How fast are they? So only 22% of that material was removed after 2 weeks after reporting. 74% of that material had not been removed after 2 weeks. So is that the kind of time periods we should expect? Or when you say swiftly, do you mean a month, or do you mean a day or an hour?
So the time between a user reporting something and the takedown is a relevant fact, but it also depends on our policies. Some of those user reports will be things that don't violate our policies, and so we won't take action. But when someone reports something that is policy violative, we would seek to take action as quickly as possible. And we're using those signals across all of our products, of user reports, of expert reports, government reports, to take action quickly, complementing what we do with our classifiers and our human reviewers.
I think we'll need to move on now, but I do think that we would appreciate your writing to us with the more detail on that in terms of the timing. And I have the impression that what you're saying is that where it doesn't violate your policies, you may try to show, if you like, counter misinformation, or to raise help sort of Samaritans, rather than actually taking the misinformation down. And I would like, I think we would like to understand that. But I know that Lauren is keen to come in on that point. Is it? Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
no, great. Thank you, and thank you for joining us here today. It's been very interesting. So I'm interested about the algorithms as well that have led potentially youngsters, people to that space to which then they are there on that journey. So, harm occurs. And I think that's been widely recognised, and I think it's, social media addiction, bullying online, disinformation, what we saw in the Southport riots. Harm occurs, and I suppose what we are really trying to find out and pin down is who then has responsibility for that harm, and then how to then rectify it. So I'd welcome what you have to say on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so harm in the real world is what my team focuses on every day. That's exactly how we're designing our policies, how we're testing our classifiers to make sure that we're mitigating those real world harm instances. And you asked about algorithms, and I think that's a really important piece of this, because you're not just dealing with harmful content through takedowns. That's obviously one tool, but the other mechanism is the ranking. And just to maybe spend a minute on how we do search ranking, it takes into account the meaning of the user's question to start with. So sometimes things will be mistyped. So we have algorithms that run across that, natural language processing that runs across that, to make sure we're really understanding the meaning of the user's query. We then think about relevance, so what is going to be the most relevant result to that user based on what people have clicked on in the past, assessment of the quality of that underlying information. When we then look at quality, it's about expertise, authoritativeness, trustworthiness, so there are multiple factors that go into assessing the quality of the site. And you can think about that quality in different contexts as well. So freshness is going to matter much more in a news context, for example, than if you're looking for a dictionary definition maybe, or looking for sort of factual information about a particular area that might be older. And then you look at the usability of that site. Is that going to be a good user experience when someone jumps onto it? Is it actually a high quality site that loads properly, and so on? And the context of the user, where are they based? So those are the factors that determine how we rank. And that's really critical to make sure that we are elevating authoritative, high quality information and not lower quality or potentially misinformation.
Do you think then that the ads that people can buy, the ads that have been able to stay up for a number of weeks, which do not violate your policies, but actually are potentially harmful into those in particular, maybe vulnerable individuals, that is a danger and that causes harm? And then how do we then rectify that harm?
Yeah, so I want to just pull apart the policies that we have for the publishers, so the content of the page and whether that page, based on that content, can monetize or not. So that's one lever. There's also the content of the ad itself, and certain types of ads we don't allow to serve. And again, there's a policy set that dictates that. So those are the two levers that we're using here, and both are really important for the question that you're asking.
Do you think that putting a potentially unsafe product, and arguably the kind of the algorithms, the checking of the ads that are not going to be promoting disinformation, do you think that they need to be proven safety-wise before that they are unleashed? Because you speak a lot about the experiments that are going on and this, and we're trialling it all the time, but there are live living consequences of people's lives that have been ruined through mis and disinformation, through websites, through ads, which have linked them there. So I just wonder, how can we help and stop this?
So we absolutely feel an accountability to our users, to our publishers, to our advertisers to create that safe ecosystem and maintain that and learn from experiences where we do get it wrong. And so judging us for the outcomes and for that continuous learning process is what I think is important here.
Do you think that the digital advertising market is sufficiently regulated and transparent to then help us hold you to account?
I know Ofcom is looking at the digital ads market as one of the potential codes under the OSA, and I think that's a really good forum to discuss exactly that point. We've engaged very closely with them on the legal and child safety codes that are already out, and we'll continue to do so on future codes.
Just on that point, and the check. You've talked about the checks you conduct before serving ads on a website or an app. Now, when it comes to banking, for example, it's a totally different sector, there's a huge emphasis to avoid money laundering on knowing your customer. Now, we received evidence calling for basic know your customer checks to be required. Do you agree?
So in certain circumstances, that as one of the preventative techniques is really, really valuable. So in the case of financial services ads, for example, we do pre-certify our advertisers against things like the FCA to make sure they are valid, trustworthy financial advertisers.
Is that a legal requirement? Or is
that's something that we implemented ourselves.
Okay.
We didn't wait for regulation. In fact, I gave evidence in 2021 to a Treasury Select Committee on exactly that point. So we do implement verification for our advertisers in certain circumstances, and that we have found to be a very important part of the overall sort of funnel I described earlier of prevention, detection and response.
So there is the intermediary and platform principles agreement or preliminary agreement. Is that, do you think that implementing that is enough to create a digital advertising system where bad actors cannot actually profit, which is what we've been talking about from the spread of misinformation? Are you familiar with it?
I'm afraid I'm not. So I don't want to comment. I want to make sure you get a good response here. So very happy to follow up, but I'm not familiar with that particular.
Well, it's okay. It's global intermediary and platform principles pilot, which the UK's Advertising Standards Authority launched. So it's a pilot rather than a programme as such, but it aims to explore the UK's online advertising system and bring greater transparency. And some companies have agreed to it in principle, or have participated. I'm not sure that's the same thing as agreeing. Actually, some have participated, but perhaps, including Google, perhaps if you could let us know what your views on it are. And I think that will the Online Harms Act, which will give a legal or is giving a legal requirement for you to meet the standards that you hold yourself to. Do you think that will change anything significantly? Do you think it will? If the Online Harms Act had been in force over the summer, do you think Google would have acted differently with regard to some of the issues that we've been talking about, whether that's on advertising or whether that's on the misinformation being returned from search results?
Yeah, maybe actually just to back up for a second and just mention on the Advertising Standards Authority. So I'm not familiar with that particular example, but they are what's called a priority flagger for us. So we integrate with their alert system and they send us flags. So we do have collaborations with them in multiple spaces, but we can follow up on that point. To your question about the Online Harms Act, so we haven't waited for regulation to do this work around the world, including in the UK. We are making changes to be ready for the Online Safety Act, so the illegal harms codes. We have our systemic risk assessment. We have made some adjustments to our appeals flows, for example, and our illegal content takedown flows to adhere to that regulation. And then we're working closely with Ofcom on the child safety codes that come into force later this year. In terms of would it have made any difference in the example over the summer, I think the illegal harm codes would have probably made a difference to overall ecosystem safety. I think that our policies and our approaches meant that we were not particularly implicated in what happened in the Southport situation, but obviously it's an atrocious attack, and our thoughts and sympathies are with the families who were impacted.
Obviously we echo your words on the Southport attack, which was horrendous. For all those involved and touched by it, we heard from witnesses from giving evidence about the impact in communities across the country of the riots which followed, and the misinformation and disinformation which drove or helped, Ofcom found drove and helped to incite those riots. I think my understanding from what you're saying is that I think you actually said that you're doing everything you can to limit the spread of misinformation. But everything you do is really based on your own processes and your mission and your standards. Do you see a need for would you see that external regulation would be helpful in making you act more quickly, or making some of your competitors act more quickly, or enabling us to have a more detailed answers as to how quickly things should be taken down, how the algorithms, the transparency of the algorithms you use, etc.?
Yeah. So online safety it's a squeeze the balloon problem. And so when you have policies and processes that can mitigate harm in a particular part of the online ecosystem, that harm will migrate to other places. So I think what's going to be really interesting with the Online Safety Act is things like the categorization of services, and making sure that includes services where the harm is actually playing out. I also think that it's really important, as the Online Safety Act continues to evolve, and we're collaborating closely with Ofcom on it, that we're not tying our hands in the use of some of these new technologies like AI to support our detection work. We've seen really interesting experiments using AI to support our classifiers. So creating synthetic data sets to train classifiers faster, using AI to make sure that a classifier can adapt to an emerging hate narrative, for example, more quickly. And that's a really interesting space that we want to make sure our hands are not tied on. And then the final area that I think is interesting here is there's a lot of value in signal sharing across the ecosystem. We see that in the scam space with things like the Global Signals Exchange that we've rolled out to share signals between online platforms, banks, telcos, law enforcement. And that sort of signal matching, so that you can see a full picture of what's playing out and react more quickly, more appropriately, I think is a really important part here that will require Ofcom and the ICO to collaborate and make sure that that signal sharing is facilitated.
I appreciate that response. Do you think that the incentive, which is, we've talked about the proportion of Google's revenues and profits which come from advertising, do you think that those signals, that sharing can really be as strong as the incentive to have more adverts to serve, and to have more content which people are accessing regardless of the standard of that content?
So it doesn't serve our business to monetize unsafe content or to run unsafe ads. That would violate people's trust in the ecosystem, and so it is absolutely in our business interest to make sure that ecosystem is safe, is trustworthy, and that's something my team spends a lot of time ensuring every day.
Emily, thank you.
I think what concerns me is the statement you just made earlier, which is you had very little to do with the Southport misinformation, yet you've been presented evidence here where you helped to monetize the creation of misinformation, a key piece of misinformation that was used to incentivize the riots. Has you done any reflection post the Southport riots, looking at how your advertising and monetization of content may have contributed to the riots we saw across the UK?
Absolutely. So any time an incident plays out in the real world, a terrorist attack, any real world harm situation, we have our strategic command teams do a root cause and corrective action assessment. We post-mortem if anything did go wrong, what can we learn from that? And we roll those learnings into our policies and our enforcement processes on a real-time basis. So absolutely. The example that
Can you share that with us, with the committee?
I'm sure we can
report.
The post-mortem.
The post-mortem.
Let me take that back and see what we can make.
So a final question, because one of the things you keep saying is hold us to account. You are the monopoly in this area, essentially. You are. I mean, let's just call it as it is. You are the market dominant. Okay, how's that?
Significant market power.
Significant market power, significant market dominance.
Google could argue with that.
Right. Within the data use and protection bill that is going through the House right now, there is a section 123 which is about ensuring that researchers, non-profitable company, others can hold companies like yourself to account. Do you, so that they can access the information that is necessary for those academics and researchers to actually be able to evaluate and hold you to account, and to share that information with legislators such as ourselves. Do you support that?
So I'm not an expert in the data bills specifically, but I can talk to you about our researcher access programs. My team actually runs some of those programs. So we do have an API that allows researchers to scrape content that is publicly visible, but to do so in a way that's really scalable and makes the research easier for them. So think about scraping download numbers or view numbers, for example, page visit numbers. Those APIs are available to researchers affiliated with academic institutions. We also provide grants to researchers to do research in the safety space, and we recognise the value of others researching as well as our own research. And we engage really closely with researchers all over the world. So my team runs a programme of consultation with researchers, with civil society, to make sure we're getting feedback on our policies or on our enforcement approaches on a really regular basis. So absolutely engaging closely with researchers.
And do you give that access also to your advertising space? And processes?
The researcher access programs do touch on search, play, a bunch of our product spaces. I'd have to check specifically what people can get access to in terms of the advertising pieces of those products, but we could follow up and provide more on that.
I think that's a really important point about. Thanks for your response, and we welcome the programs that you run. And we received some evidence on them, and not all companies do offer the same kind of access. But the access, I think is it open to everyone? You know, is it open to everyone? And does it also give access to, for example, the questions that we've asked about how quickly something came down? Could a researcher API access that effectively? Google has a huge amount of data and influence. And I want to give one example from the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust, which stated that there's 170,000 Google searches with anti-Semitic content made each year, and that when Google altered its algorithm to remove "Are Jews evil" from its autocomplete function, the number of people making that search fell by 10%. Now, what I would like to understand is whether the access that you offer as part of the programs that you'll give, that you're saying, is available to everyone, so that they, other than yourself, other than Google, we could find out how quickly are posts with anti-Semitic content taken down, how many of them are there? Is there that kind of transparency and access for research purposes?
Yeah, so there are a few criteria, including being affiliated with an being affiliated with an academic institution is one of the criteria. So we could follow up and share those criteria, but the access is pretty open to researchers around the world for products like YouTube, for example. On your question about the time between something being uploaded and taken down, let me ask about that as well. I don't know that specific point, but I would imagine that the sort of date stamp of when something was uploaded, if it's affiliated with the content publicly visible, and then you can see when that was taken down, I would imagine that was in the data set.
Okay, if you could let us have the sort of the key parameters that the API gives access to. Lauren, did you have a...
Yeah, very much. Just the last kind of point up from me is there's a perception of what we kind of understand here today that Google can profit from false advertisement or advertisement that doesn't comply with your things, essentially profiting from harm. So where is the investment in the repair and the recovery? And do you feel that Google has a place for that? For instance, our mental health systems are at a crisis point, a large part due to, certainly for our youngsters, on the social media side of things. So do you think that Google has a role and a place in reinvesting and preventing and investing in the harm recovery?
It's a really interesting question, and I think you're right that harm recovery is a critical part here, and who bears the accountability for that. We invest a lot in things like our media literacy program, so trying to make sure that children, including children in the UK, are able to assess the quality of the information they're consuming and make decisions about what they actually consume. So things like Be Internet Legends, things like our Family Link tool that allows children and parents to have a conversation about what that child wants to have access to, what the parent is comfortable with them having access to, and we have training materials to help parents through that conversation so that can be managed together. So absolutely see responsibilities in terms of making sure children are having are being educated on information quality, are having some boundaries put in place, as well as obviously our regular approaches to ensuring safety across our platforms.
That's the before bit and the prevention bit, and I welcome that space.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the harm that may have been caused while we're getting all the different AI algorithms, or the harm that's being done now.
Yeah.
Do you think that Google has a role and a place in helping facilitate their recovery?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, we do consult with victims as part of evolving our policies, and we do look, for example, at in the NCII space in non-consensual intimate imagery. We've made our appeals, our kind of notification systems much easier for victims to use, and then we've committed to things like removing duplicates, so trying to prevent that sort of ongoing harm. We work very closely with civil society groups in these spaces, people like Refuge UK and the Samaritans. So that consultation with victims, that consultation with experts, I think is a key part of our obligations here. But I think it's a really fair question of how do you repair, not just how do you prevent.
Does Google have a charitable foundation?
We do. We have google.org that invests in charitable endeavours. So whether that be, making sure that we're providing support to charities and ad grants, training. So we could share more on that if that's of interest.
Paul, I think you had a...
Just a final point. I know that companies like Google often resort to tech jargon, but I'd just point out that you referred earlier in context of the Southport attacks to your own post-mortem. I think that's a singularly inappropriate use of the word, given the actual real-life post-mortems that took place after that attack.
Apologies, I was not meaning to cause offence with that, and you're absolutely right.
Well, I want to, I think we have any other comments or final points? I just want to really thank you, Amanda. We've you faced and responded to all our questions with, I think, a level of sincerity and knowledge that we've really appreciated it. And where that hasn't been possible, you have offered, well, at least agreed to send us further information. I think for my constituents, and as an engineer myself, I'm really aware of the sense of a lack of accountability and a lack of agency that many of my constituents, that many people generally, and I think other MPs are nodding at me, that many of the public generally feel when it comes to technology, and particularly when it comes to technology from huge multi-trillion-dollar companies headquartered elsewhere from the UK. And I think that by being here and by being as open with us as you've been able to do, you've helped to increase the understanding and of the accountability and the support for accountability that some tech companies view, and to give my constituents, I hope, a slightly greater sense of agency. So we really appreciate that, and thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you very much for having me here today.
Order. Order.